Till 4 o'clock, 70 minutes, and then we'll be done for the day. We'll relax. We'll get some drinks and food and chat. Doctor, thank you.
Okay. We are on points F and G, integrity and textual criticism. Now, this is kind of a big deal because the integrity issue swirls around whether or not the Gospel of Mark ends at 16:8. Tomorrow, we are going to talk intensively about that for hours, okay? So I'll just say that there is this issue about whether or not Mark ends at 16:8, for they were afraid. That place is, as far as I know, the only place in the New Testament in which the manuscripts actually discuss the problem. I'm going to say that again. It's the only place in which, stop being in the hall, sit down. It is the only place in which the manuscripts actually discuss the problem of the ending, the reading. See, they say some ended here, some go on. So there are plenty of manuscript variants all over the place, but you generally, or basically, do not get the manuscripts themselves saying things like, from here on, other manuscripts say this. So there is this issue. Now, what's become popular in the last maybe decade is the notion, and my friend J. Keith Elliott is a proponent of this, as well as this guy Clayton Croy, is the belief that the ending of the Gospel of Mark is not at 16:8, it's not the long ending, but it's missing, and so is the beginning. So this was not around as a theory 20 years ago, really. So this notion is that both the beginning and the end of the Gospel of Mark were originally longer than we have now. I don't believe that. I think what we have is what we have. And I want to emphasize there is no manuscript evidence for there being a different beginning to the Gospel of Mark. There's manuscript evidence for a different way to end it, but not for a different beginning.
So the argument is that it's not missing, but different than what we have?
Well, that it's missing. That's the argument. That the first and the last pages of the codex, the book, came off. And so the end is gone and the beginning is gone. Now, we can talk about that later, but I just want to give you that kind of overall. Now, so there is this issue of integrity, which we'll talk about further. But right now, I want to talk about point G, textual criticism. Now, for those of you who are pastors, I want you to listen to this pretty carefully. I do textual criticism on the Gospel of Mark differently than anybody else does, including the big text critics, including Jeff Kloa, including Keith Elliott, including the Munster people. All right, I want to explain this to you. And I can explain it by looking at this sheet, which I handed out. This is a new way to lay out manuscripts. The way manuscripts are currently, the manuscript evidence is presented in our standard book is like this. That is to say, there is a basic text up here. Then down in the bottom is what is called the critical apparatus. And down there, they have their little symbols up here to direct you down there. This tells you readings that other manuscripts have at that place. Something's missing, something's added, something's different, and so on. All right? So this text up here is actually the basic text is actually a text that is put together by the editors looking at all of the manuscript evidence and picking the readings that they think are best. It's not following any one manuscript. It's not even following a handful of manuscripts. It is an eclectic text. They have taken some from here, and some from here, and so on. Now, back in the late 70s, about 1979, I heard a man named Reuben Swanson give a presentation on this, and he said that he did a study of the first 12 chapters of the Gospel of Luke, and that he found that in the first 12 chapters of the Gospel of Luke, fully 12% of the verses had no manuscript evidence standing behind them. And by that he meant that there was no manuscript that read exactly that set of words in that order. And he said, there's got to be a better way. Reuben Swanson did this better way, and this is a copy of one of the pages of his book. He's dead now, but while he was alive, he did his books of manuscripts layout for Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1 Corinthians, and Galatians. Very major letters, of course. Here's what he did. At the top, you'll notice that these are kind of like paragraphs, okay, vertically, paragraphs. The top line always has the reading of manuscript B. If you take a look at the top line, the first piece of evidence is always a B. B is manuscript Vaticanus, which is in the Vatican, and it was written in the early 4th century. It's generally speaking considered to be the best manuscript for the Gospels. Not perfect, but generally considered to be of very high quality. So what he did was, in an excruciating way, he laid out the reading of manuscript B. It's the first line of each one of these paragraphs, okay? So you can reproduce B if you'd like. Then he put along the same line, take a look at the top. You'll notice you have B, the Hebrew Aleph, and L. Those two manuscripts agree with B. So B, Aleph, and L all read those words as they are laid out. If you go to the next paragraph, verse 13.
What's L?
L is manuscript Regius from Paris. It's just one of.
Aleph is.
Aleph, did you say? Sinaitica.
Sinaitica.
Yeah, Aleph is, I thought you said L.
Well,
Aleph
both of them
is
are.
Sinaitica.
I remember when Aleph.
Yeah, that's it. Now, you look at verse 13, that paragraph right under the heading, Jesus receives children. You'll see now a bunch of manuscripts agree with B. B, Aleph, C, L, Delta, Theta, C, 124, 579. In other words, there aren't so many variants here. You've got 3 other possible variants, and essentially, you can tell what the variants are by either the spaces or the underline. So wherever there is underlying, there are words that are not in the same place in the first line. So you can see in the second line, the two words hapsetai auton in the middle there are in a different order than the ones right before them, and they're read by D and theta and 565. Now, what happens when you do this is you don't get this piecemeal kind of stuff in the Nestle-Aland text, where all of a sudden it's just blip, something's coming up like that. You can actually trace the reading of D or something like that just by reading through this. Now, what I did when I started the work on Mark, when I started writing in the late 00s, is we have a facsimile of Manuscript Vaticanus at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. It cost $5,000. Judy and I gave money toward this project. We were the third institution in the United States to get this official Vatican-produced copy for the turn of the millennium in 1999. And in fact, there is an accompanying document signed by Pope John Paul, interestingly enough, signed on Christmas Day of 1999, and I'm thinking, like, you didn't have other stuff to do for Christmas Day, but to sign these things, But at any rate, this is the world's most perfect facsimile. It's full color. It's got all the imperfections, wormholes from the worms in the manuscript pages. If something's wrinkled, it's wrinkled, and everything like that. It's a big, thick book like this. And so I sat for a month and I read Manuscript Vaticanus line by line and compared it to the Swanson layout. There were about 6 places where Swanson was wrong, I thought. But it's a very good layout. Now, what I did then is I was thinking, well, what text should I use for this Gospel of Mark commentary? Should I just use the Nestle-Aland text, the one that everybody uses, this one right here? Or should I use Swanson? Or what? So I did a study, and using Swanson, because it lays out the manuscript so you can see them. I went through, this took a long time. I went through and I looked for what the text would look like if I took manuscripts that represented each of the 3 major textual traditions: Alexandrian text from Egypt, Western text, Byzantine text. And I said, every time we have a variant, I want to see what the text would look like if I chose a reading that I could have evidence from each of the 3 major textual traditions. When I put this together, then, I said, this is the Greek profile of the Gospel of Mark. Okay? So you know how he uses tenses, you know how he uses conjunctions by doing this. Now the next step was really key. So I said, if you do it this way, and you take a look at the contours of Mark's Greek, considering only the witnesses of all the traditions, if I couldn't find the Western tradition, the Alexandrian tradition, the Byzantine tradition, if I couldn't find evidence that they cohere, I just ignored it, because I said I can't be sure. I only took I only took readings where I could have support for all of them. Then I said this: is there a manuscript, or are there a group of manuscripts that most especially exemplifies this understanding of Mark's Greek? My profile of how Mark uses tenses, conjunctions, vocabulary, and all the rest. And to my amazement, it was manuscript B and its allies. I discovered that their manuscript B most closely approximates the basic understanding of Mark's Greek that I had developed. And I also discovered that there are some manuscripts that are closely allied with it. Now, I want you to look at your sheet here. You will see B and its allies if you look at things below that title, Jesus Receives the Children. B, Aleph, C, L, delta, theta, C, all right? Now, not theta, not 124, but B, Aleph, C, L, delta, C, 579. That's B and its allies. Go down to the next line. B has a different spelling. That's the only reason these other ones don't agree to it. Aleph, C, L, delta, C, 579. Go to the next paragraph. B, now you have the majority text, but you have delta in there again, you have C in there, you have 579, and go to the very bottom paragraph. B, Aleph, C, L, W this time, delta, theta again, C, 565 above. So I'm going to put this up on here. So this is the collocation of manuscripts. B and its allies. Aleph, L, delta, C, 565, 579, and then often C and 33. So in my opinion, that set of manuscripts most clearly represented Mark's text with the features of Mark and Greek. Like I say, when I say features, I mean the way he uses tenses, the way he uses conjunctions, the way he does vocabulary selection, and so forth. So, so most of you are pastors and know what you were taught. Unlike what you guys were taught, I do not simply look around and at each place say, what's the more difficult reading or something like that. I start with the assumption that B and its allies have the text we want. And if there is a split amongst B and its allies, then I have to kind of determine, look, which one more closely approximates the Greek profile of Mark. What I found, interestingly enough, is that B seems better in the early part of the gospel, and kind of about the time you get to Jesus in Jerusalem, some of its allies seem to be a little bit better, But I just wanted to explain this to you, and for the lay people here, I know this is kind of gobbledygook, but for the pastors, it's important for me to say this, that in my commentary here, this is the only, I need a bigger page to illustrate. This is the only Concordia commentary in which the Greek text is printed out. Why? Because I'm not using the Nestle text. See, I am using the text of B and its allies. And then my translation rides on that. So I will, at points, interact with the Nestle-Aland text, the standard text with the stuff in the apparatus, okay? And I will interact with that. But I would say probably on average about one per pericope, I will disagree with the Nestle-Aland text. So this is, you know, I've had discussions with people about this. Now, Keith Elliott, I think, is the finest text critic in the world. And he is very sort of bemused by this as a procedure, you know. So trying to figure out Mark's Greek profile from looking at all the manuscripts to asking, well, which individual ones most especially represent that I figured out, and then kind of using that as my basic text. So B and its allies are kind of the basis. This is discussed, if you have this, the commentary in volume 1. This is on pages 24 through 26, and pages 24 through 26. So after I make that explanation, let me just read here from page 25. This is the spiral position I use. 1, a general understanding of an author's linguistic usage is achieved by examining characteristics present in readings supported by virtually all manuscripts and so-called text types. 2, against this background, the tendencies of individual manuscripts can be more fully understood and evaluated. 3, with a general understanding of an author's usage and of manuscript tendencies in hand, individual disputed readings can be evaluated to establish a text. 4, the text so established can then augment the general and preliminary understanding of author's usage to reach a fuller understanding of it. So it's a kind of a spiral procedure. I think it's right. I'm going to tell you people, and you probably have divined this from what I'm saying, it's a lot of work. I mean, I have charts. I kept track, literally, of how many times kai, the word for and, is used. How many times dev, which is kind of an alternate, is used. Where it's used. What is the pattern? And so on like that. I have reams. This is all done by hand. There is no computer usage to this because I believe in reading text, not reading numbers. So this kind of analysis, in my opinion, has to be done for every biblical book. And I think I don't quite have the guts to take on John yet, but I've done a linguistic analysis of John exactly along these lines, and I'm going to have to do the manuscript analysis, but it's just such hard slogging. I mean, this took me months and months and months to do something like this. So I got a paper published in Novum Testamentum on the Greek profile of Mark and Manuscript Vaticanus, in which I talk about doing the general study of Mark's Greek and how Vaticanus interfaces with that, and then that became the policy for this. So I just want to make clear to all the pastors especially, I am in 2 volumes, I am working with a different text than the Nestle-Aland text. And I think their procedure is fundamentally wrong. Fundamentally wrong. I am quite convinced this is correct. So, in other words, that what you have to do is be comfortable first. You almost might say in the skin of Mark. You got to be comfortable with the way Mark writes Greek. And then once you are comfortable with that, then you can see which manuscripts most adequately represent that.
Isn't this reversing the process?
It's sort of reversing the process. It's really relying on internal evidence. Yeah, it's really relying on internal evidence. But other people don't do that because they don't read the gospel with it. See, they don't read the gospel in such a way that you are, intensely focusing on level 2, the story. I am intensely focusing on that and the way that's represented in the language, not just in the RSV, in the language. And if you do that, then you have a different relationship to the text. You just do.
Absolutely.
Now I'm going to say one more technical thing. Please forgive me for this, but I want to say this for the pastors and the guys working with Greek. One example of the way this worked out is with the Greek word oithus immediately. Okay? Now, you will read in the books that Mark uses oithus immediately a lot in his gospel. I could not establish that in the first step. Why? Because all of the textual traditions didn't support that. B and its allies do, basically the Alexandrian text do, but the Western text and the Byzantine text does not read that. It reads oitheos. So that got put on the side. This really struck Keith Elliott. He said, boy, I've never thought about that. I said, right. When you say Mark uses oithus, you're reading one manuscript tradition. I want to know in the first instance, if I try to figure out Mark's Greek, what do all the traditions do? So I put that aside. Well, then when I determined that B was a really good representation of Mark, and it's B and its allies, then I took a look there, and what does B and its allies do? They do oithus. So then I said, well, if the guy who's the most reliable guy does something when there's a dispute, let's go with the most reliable guy. And so then I went with that. See, but I couldn't go with it at first because it wasn't there in the entire textual tradition. This is why I say this was a lot of work.
Can you write the two different?
Yeah.
Make sure.
Yeah, no, right. See,
Right.
this is what you see. This is what you'll see in all the texts, oithus, like that. Okay, but most of the texts, by far the great majority of the manuscripts have the more proper adverbial form oitheos, which Matthew has.
Right.
But not Mark. But you know what? That, which is the adjective form, used adverbially, like you say, I hit it real good, something like that, parallels all over the place in play.
You know what's really cool about what your method is here? It's a lot of work, but what really frosts your cookies is when people say things like,
Yeah.
But, and they say, well, Strong says this or that. But, you really find out when you read the guy's body of work and examine every time that guy uses that and said, no, this is how he uses it because he uses it 28 times. And I've been through the 28 times and all 28 times it does this or that. And, I can't say that is cool.
Well,
But, I mean,
I'm going to show you more detail now, but let me just throw a little sort of gem out here. In the first half of the gospel, the basic conjunction is kai. You get the last half of the gospel, de starts to overtake it. And all of a sudden, you get to chapter 15, there are way more des than there are kais, whereas it's exactly the opposite in chapter 3. No one has ever noticed this. Why? Because they're not reading the gospel like this. See, to me, this is why I was at this Society of Biblical Literature thing when the guy was saying, Mark uses kai as his basic conjunction. Have you read the last half of the gospel? Have you read chapter 15? No, you might want to take a look because it doesn't work like that there. See, you've got to actually slum in the thing, to the extent, let me just tell you, to the extent that, most of the time, verb for speaking, elegant, eifet, okay? Efe. First time it occurs is in chapter 9, verse 12. It occurs a half a dozen times in the second half of the gospel, never occurs in the first half of the gospel. Really interesting. Classical touch. Okay? So I'm reading along in the thing, all of a sudden, boom! What's F.A. doing there? I haven't seen that before. See, now, when you deal with other guys, stuff like that doesn't strike them. Or you're reading along and you see all these Chi's and all of a sudden there's 2, 3 des in a row and say, well, where'd that happen? That didn't happen before. So if you are, as much as I am a huge fan, as you will see, of interpreting on level 2, level 1 is the foundation. Level 1 is the language. And if you do not have the language under control, you got nothing under control. Because it all rides on that rail. And Martin Franz, man, I'll never forget this, having him in class. I mean, this is just such a great saying. This has inspired me my entire career. The gospel does not do Hutty's business. The gospel does not do Hutty's business. In other words, the gospel doesn't trump grammar. The grammar is the railroad track, baby. And you have got to take into account what's actually being written and what it's saying, and not jimmy that stuff around because you think you know where you have to go. If that puts you in a conundrum for 6 months, like Passages did for me, then so be it. It's my problem, it's not Mark's problem. You know, this is a very, very important thing, is the kind of railroad track nature of the grammar. You can't make it do stuff it's not doing. And for all that, that is a big deal for us because it's not a wax and nose. You know, I mean, you have to actually work with stuff. Yes, sir.
I think you just answered my question, but I'll let you affirm that. My first was, are you basically following inductive or deductive reasoning?
Inductive.
Right, okay. And your a priori is that?
Yeah, my a priori is that when I work with a text, I am going to be able, with enough work, to get a profile of a man's Greek. And I will do this getting witnesses from all sorts, Western text, Egyptian text, Byzantine text. If I can't get them from all sources, I'll throw that piece of evidence out. And I'll be able to get this, and then I will start working with, all right, what gives me the best shot at this kind of profile, you know? And man, I got to tell you, this is really hard work. It really is. And you have to spend literally hours and hours and hours on this, which is why, Dean Kavoris, I don't take any crap from anybody at SBO. No, I'm telling you, when we have the Mark section like that, boom, that's it. Somebody starts talking about the Greek of Mark, he better know what he's talking about.
You can answer this after four.
Yeah.
If you want, but you just took us back out of the football game because we were in there when we were learning and understanding Greek.
Mhm.
Well, but now we can't even agree on what that level 1, the signals are.
What the signifiers are.
The signifiers are.
Well, I love it when you talk like that.
And well, and so is there, so do I lose now some of that color if I pick the wrong, I don't know, manuscript?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah. Well, I mean, all I can say is it makes a difference. Yeah, all of a sudden, all I can say is it makes a difference. And you better pay attention to who's doing what, and what manuscript you're. I mean, it just bothers me when I read a commentary, and the people are saying, "Oh, well, this manuscript does this, but I'm going to follow this manuscript." You want to say, do you people have any idea what you're doing here?
When you're reading Vaticanus, you're reading it, the text at the time, which was all the capital letters, right?
Yes, and no spaces in between.
Right. You're reading that with an acceptable or accepted kind of division of where those words are.
I had to figure that out.
Or you're doing that yourself, not based on how it came down.
No. I have to do that myself. Now, I mean, you look at that. This text is a pony, okay, but you always got to keep the pony out of your head. So you're going along and seeing if it could divide up differently and so on.
So I mean, but you did the profile based on the text that you read from Vaticanus? Or
No, I did the profile based upon this.
Okay.
On this, because I had to get readings in which all these manuscripts would kind of agree. Yeah.
So I mean, but the process of going from the all capital letters.
Yeah. This was just to make sure, because he's got Vaticanus at the top here. I wanted to make sure his baseline text was right.
But it's Vaticanus as we would be able to read it, in our particular text.
No. This is Vaticanus as it's in the manuscript.
Isn't it?
No. Here. Take a look at this third paragraph. Take a look at this paragraph.
Right.
The third paragraph. The one where B is all by itself at the top. You see that? Now, the reason B is by itself and not with the second line is because of the spelling of the first word. See, instead of it's epitimeson, but they have spelled it with epsilon iota rather than with a iota. All right, so if you're looking at the manuscript, like you're looking at there, you're going to see epsilon iota.
You guys have?
That's what we got. Okay. All right, and so you're going to see the spelling irregularities here that do not appear in the Nestle-Aland text. And by the way, that's why I don't follow B slavishly. It's got what you would call idiosyncratic spelling. See, so it's not likely that this spelling, which is not a normal spelling, is the correct spelling when all other manuscripts don't do it this way, including, and here's the point, all of its allies. See, so all of its allies are making a good counterweight here at this point. But if I'm going to answer your question very specifically here, what does manuscript B read? Your best shot is this, not that, because they have smoothed out all spelling.
In the copy. Oh, here. Okay.
Yeah, no, that copy has the odd spelling.
One critical apparatus or in the text?
Well, in the text and the critical apparatus, they will not reflect spelling irregularities. See, in other words, they wouldn't say, well, B has, they wouldn't put B in the footnote and say it's got a different spelling. They just kind of ignore that. Okay, that's okay. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But just know this, that in your Nestle-Aland text, there are hundreds and thousands of readings of manuscripts that are not recorded. And you find them out by reading Swanson. Now, he's not 100% accurate, but he's like 95% accurate, so it's good enough for government.
So when you're going back and looking at the text and
Yeah.
all the capitals,
Yeah.
not just, how do you?
Myoscopes?
Myoscopes.
Yeah.
You're looking at that and comparing it, doing kind of your own separation.
Yeah. And I'm comparing it to
that.
To this, not to that, to this.
That must have taken you how long?
It took me a month.
Oh, okay.
I sat in the rare book room day after day and looked at that. And by the way, when you do it, you read it out loud. That's why ancients read out loud. Because when you read it out loud, the stuff breaks more naturally for you. So, so just to show people how this might look, let me just do what the beginning of John would look. Anarche, ein, ho, logos. In the beginning was the Word. Okay, it'd look like this. So that's N, arche, the Yoda subscripts, add script, ein, ha, logos. So it would be, let's do an English kind of thing here. See, it looks like that, and then it's easier than you think once you catch on. But if you're reading out loud, in the, all of a sudden in the kind of falls out. But it's really kind of hard. Yeah, it's really kind of hard. But see, what I wanted to do is, because I had a suspicion that B was going to be important here, I was using Swanson. I want to make sure Swanson's text to B was right. So I checked the whole thing out just to make sure that the reading of B was correct.
So N-arche, ein, so you have the I there, which is.
That's the Yoda subscript.
Yoda subscript.
Yeah, it comes add script in the.
That's what I'm.
Yeah.
Especially when you're going to write a book about it and say, essentially, thus saith the Lord. You can't be, hold other people's feet to the fire if you don't hold yourself to the fire. I mean, I get it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're dealing with the Word of God.
Right.
I mean, what the heck here? Yeah.
As your approach, one response to the positive.
Not a lot. They did a review of my book at the National Society of Biblical Literature meeting in San Diego back in about 2014. And the guy who was supposed to talk about text criticism criticized me for what he thought was sole reliance on Vaticanus. He clearly didn't read this, because I was saying it's Vaticanus, that's manuscript B, and its allies, and there were places where I went against it, and so on like that. So, and he didn't comment on, in my response, I said to him, well, you didn't comment on my procedure, which is just different than everybody else's, and relies, Dean, as you have pointed out, on internal evidence, where I'm trying to figure out the Greek of Mark and then saying what best represents that Greek, But you do the Greek of Mark on the basis of a wide range of manuscript readings, not on the basis of B or 1 or 2.
3 comments. Number 1, I love this. Number 2, this is bizarre. Number 3, does CPH know what they bought?
No. See, you are very good. I got to tell you, man. Jeff Cloa, who has been under fire for all kinds of stuff, said to me once, I didn't know if I should mention this, but since you raised this, said to me, Jim, they criticize me for my view of the text. And he said, they don't realize that in your commentary, you have created your whole new text. You have created your own text. I said, yeah, I don't know, somehow they didn't see that, But the thing is, I've got reasons and evidence for everything. I am not just pulling it out of thin air or something like that. There are times when I will go with manuscript B against all of its allies, but that's only because of larger issues, and times when I will go against the allies and go against B, and that's because of larger issues.
With tongue in cheek, knowing that I is used more in the first half of Mark and not, have you ever been accused of starting a new JDP for the You tested
No,
and having two
no.
authors?
No, and I'll talk about that later, but thank you for bringing that up. Now, I sort of hated to spend that much time, but this is unique. This is unique from my approach to Mark, is what I'm doing with the text. Contours of the Greek from all the manuscripts, which manuscripts best represent it, and those manuscripts are P and its allies, which I have put up there. Now, let me then just talk. Yeah.
Could you, and I understand perfectly your definition of how you do it.
Yeah.
How would you, in 20 words or less, do how it is normally been done? Like how necessary?
Okay. Yeah. What's standard textual procedure? All right. What they do is every time they come to a variant, they ask, what reading would be the most difficult reading for the scribe, the reading that would give him the greatest difficulty doctrinally or linguistically, stylistically, historically, and so on like that. And they ask, what is the more difficult reading, and that's the one they pick. So that this sounds counterintuitive, but the theory is this, that the scribes will not purposely make the text harder, they will make it easier to understand. So if there's a grammatical irregularity, they will tend to smooth it out. If there is this is good, this happens all the time. If there is a kind of a phraseological irregularity, they'll smooth it out. So this would be an example. The scribes and the Pharisees occurred together lots of times. So you'll get a passage and it'll say, Jesus said to the scribes and Pharisees. Okay? Some manuscripts will say, Jesus said to the scribes. And so they will always pick that latter one, because they'll say scribes and Pharisees was a natural complement to each other. And the scribe would have just kind of gone on and done that. And, instead of that, you go for the one that kind of occasions a little bit more difficulty. Here's another example for you pastors with the Greek. A hina clause takes the subjunctive mood for the verb. Well, if you look, let's say, especially in Paul, there are some places in which in a hina clause an indicative is used, which would be a grammatical irregularity. Well, the scribe will tend to use the subjunctive, and smooth out the grammatical irregularity, so they will pick the reading of hina plus the indicative mood. All right, now, that's all real interesting, except my problem with it is everything is atomized. That at each place you're just kind of making a decision, and you're not thinking something like this, well, maybe this author always does use the subjunctive or something like that. You can't just, because scribes made mistakes too, So I'm thinking that it's just too arbitrary to do that each time. And the thing is, it just causes you to have this atomized approach, which Swanson discovered in 12% of the cases, there was no manuscript that actually read this. See, you got to have a manuscript, I think, that actually reads what you're picking. Not one where you say there are 5,000 manuscripts, but none of them reads this. Hello? What is the chance of that?
They're finding manuscripts that are 6,000.
Yeah.
So the messianic is always kind of being revised.
Yeah.
Are you finding more allies, or are your allies
No,
set?
I have no allies.
But you're set with this. This is.
Oh, yeah. Now, look, if somebody wants to argue with me on the basis of what I'm doing, I'm fine with that. And there are places where I'm just not sure. I will say in the commentary, man, this is a really close choice. You know, you could go this way or you could go this way. It's not gonna involve any doctrinal thing or something like that. But I mean, something like the scribes and Pharisees or something like that. You know, you might have a real close call. B and two or one ally has won, and all the other allies go the other way. Well, I don't know. You know, that's a tough call at that point. Yeah. I'm going to have a minutia problem, not the big kind of problem, right? And so, and by the way, so for the ending of Mark, B and Aleph, the two biggies, B and its major allies, do not have the long ending. All right, now the rest of the allies do, but B and Aleph do not have the long ending. So that I have other reasons not to do the long ending, but just on the basis of those manuscripts, that becomes actually pretty important. Yes?
What I find interesting is your idea of trying to create, something of a profile.
Yeah, a profile. Yeah.
Of the way of the writing style.
Yeah.
Of the author. Is I find that would be controversial when applied to scripture when it's used so many other places to authenticate disputed manuscripts of other literary figures, but it suddenly becomes controversial when applied to scripture.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. I agree with you. Now, one of the things that happens when you do this is that you find, if you follow B and its allies, all of a sudden Mark has some really cool literary features. And I think a lot of people don't like that. They want Mark to be very crude and so on like that. And we'll talk about that, but there are some stunning literary features in the Gospel of Mark that sort of come to light if you're following B and its allies. Right.
Is that article available, or is it
Yeah, it's available. Yeah.
When was that you were reading?
Well, that article was in, let me think now. That article was in about 05, something like that. Yeah.
It should be online maybe somewhere.
Well, now here, hold on. It's in the bibliography. Yeah, it's in the bibliography here. Just a second here. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's the date. Let's see here. It's 05. The Greek of Codex Vaticanus in the Second Gospel and Mark in Greek. Novum Testamentum, volume 47, pages 209 to 249. And I had a big difficulty getting it published. And I would have never guessed this because the article is 40 pages of a lot of technical stuff. And people said, this is finally Keith Elliott, the guy I've referenced, who is a big deal for Novum Testamentum, got it in there. But he said the problem is you're sort of long for an article and short for a book. And, but they finally published it. Yeah. By the way, later this year, another article of mine is going to come out in Novum Testamentum on classical Greek structures in the Gospel of Mark. Now, I presented this at the International New Testament Society last August, a year ago, and I was really happy that they received that. But that's the kind of thing nobody else works on because they don't see the Gospel of Mark as having good Greek. But I can show you that there are these stunning features in the Gospel of Mark if you're just willing. I mean, you don't have to be doing my text criticism. If you're just kind of willing to open your eyes, it's sort of amazing.
Hey, Dr. Voelz,
Yeah.
would you comment on Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, where he said many have undertaken to write, and if Mark is down the way as the third one, what was Luke seeing? Just little fragments here and there?
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I have to say, that kind of stuff never bothers me. I'm not thinking that that I gotta solve that problem in some way. I don't think, frankly, that it impacts how I see Mark. There could have been other efforts, or maybe there's maybe he's referring to Matthew. There might be something else. I'm just not sure what to say. But I will tell you this: that is a standard beginning to historiography in the ancient world. Many have undertaken to do the understanding of Rome, but I'm going to tell you, and so on like that. Yeah, that's not unusual. Well, let me talk about H, canonical status. And Dean's going to like this. The fact of the matter is that there was always and only an acceptance of our four Gospels. Of what? Our four Gospels. Yeah. It's been very popular to talk about all these other Gospels: Gospel of Peter, Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Mary, Gospel of Truth, and so on like that. There is no evidence of any non-canonical gospel before 150. They all arise in the middle. That's an approximate date. They all arise in the middle of the 2nd century. We have plenty of evidence by citations and so on like that, and some manuscript fragments of the canonical gospels being available early on. You can tell it just from reading the Didache. The teaching of the 12 apostles, a document from about 150. Now, here's the next point, and it's really important. The Gospels are different than the non-canonical Gospels in two more important respects. Number one, their name. It is Kata Matayan, Kata Markan, Kata Lukan, Laka, Kata Ioanne. According to Matthew, according to Mark, according to Luke, according to John. All of the non-canonical Gospels are Gospel of. Gospel of Peter, Gospel of Truth, Gospel of Mary. So this is a very simple thing, but if you look at the manuscripts, it makes a huge difference. So it is not the gospel of this person for our Gospels. And I regret that so often I say the Gospel of Mark. I shouldn't say that. It's Gospel according to Mark. So just by its name, the church is testifying to the fact that there are four views of this great cataclysmic world-changing event. And it is not my personal take, it is Mark, or my personal story or something like that. It is this is Mark's view of that thing, but there are others. See? But there are others. Second, once we get a little further into the 2nd century, it becomes apparent that the four Gospels circulated together. Now, they didn't always circulate as four. Sometimes the synoptics circulated as three. But sometimes John was separate. Sometimes John was included. But here's my point. The canonical Gospels circulated as a unit. They did not circulate as sort of independent efforts. Now, this is huge, folks. The next time you see a National Geographic special telling you that Irenaeus was pulling manuscripts out of the wall and he got these four and he didn't take these, just realize it's crap, okay? It's crap. It is not like that. The four Gospels impressed themselves upon the church. They circulated together. For example, one of the earliest manuscripts we have, which is P72, which is, by the way, very congruent to Vaticanus, has Luke and John together in it. Well, clearly the thing was circulating together. And that's probably late 2nd century. So I want to say this, especially for the lay people. Don't be deceived by these TV specials and stuff that give you this impression. By the 2nd century, there were 70 Gospels around, or something like that, 50. And then the church kind of, what would you say, arbitrarily picked these 4, but they could have picked these other ones, and they're just keeping them out of your ken or something like that. No, not at all. Not at all. The Gospels are circulating together. The other Gospels are arising late, and the other Gospels can make no challenge to the 4 Gospels. They are the absolute bedrock of the church's witness. Yeah. I don't know. I would say by, like, say, maybe the 120s or 30s, something like that.
Before that, what?
I mean, we don't know. You know, we can make all kinds of stuff up. I really don't know.
I mean, they circulated individually to begin with.
They would have circulated individually to begin with, but I mean, soon they just began to circulate together, and they're all kind of cited, like in the Didache, this early document, teaching of the 12 apostles, where you're citing from Matthew and citing from Luke and so on.
Where do you date Didache? Off the top of your head.
115.
Oh, 115?
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that, early 2nd century.
Okay.
So, you know, don't be deceived. You know, all you got to do is read the Gospel of Peter. That's all you got to do. Read the Gospel of Peter. Easter morning. The guards are there. The angel comes down. Rolls away the tomb. The guards are like dead men. Jesus comes out. The cross is walking behind him. Jesus is so big that his head is in the clouds. Does this sound like anything like our Gospels? I mean, this is absurd, this kind of stuff. And you know, somehow they're thinking that this is actually some competition for the synoptic Gospels. Gospel of Thomas. Okay, Gospel of Thomas. Ooh, all the sayings of Jesus. Ooh, the 5th Gospel, yes. Well, read the last verse of the Gospel of Thomas. Peter said to Jesus, "Make Mary go away from us, for she is unworthy, because she is a woman." Jesus says to him, "Then I will make her a man, so that she is worthy to follow us." Oh, you want this in the canon, do you? This is one of the books you think is really kind of right there, along with the God. I mean, I'm just always amazed that the people aren't actually sort of reading these sources.
What kind of support do you draw or deny from the early Lexington?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be a couple of centuries later, I think. Yeah. Well, they wouldn't ever think of drawing on one of these. And this is, and by the way, you know, we had this discussion at the break, or at lunch. Please, Kavoris, I beg you, stop reading that Passion Harmony during that.
I do not.
Please, do not read a Passion Harmony during that. It's not the Bible. The Bible is the 4 Gospels. And the Passion Harmony is going to do stuff to the story that you don't want it to do. You're going to get a view of the disciples in Mark. which is different than a view of the disciples in Luke, and you don't want that all mixed up. So that business of, well, the church had experience with that. It's called the diatessaron. Tatian's diatessaron, around 150. And you know what they did with that? When they got it, they burned them all. There's a reason why they burned them all.
Been around for a while.
Yeah, but, you know.
Mostly last thing in the East for a while.
Sure, amongst the heretics. Yeah. So essentially, the church wasn't going to put up with that stuff. And neither should we.
Also, and we were talking about this whole idea about the gospel and going teaching about, it's not just these National Geographic specials. I stumbled across a TV preacher named Andy Stanley one time who was going on about, you don't really get what all these centuries of Christians, believe without having the Bible.
Yeah.
And tell them this, and that the Bible wasn't around till after Constantine. And I just was watching this and I'm thinking, what is he saying?
Yeah, what world's this guy in? Yeah, no, I mean, this is just not right. That's just not right. And you have to really watch about people just making stuff up or what the manuscripts are saying and so on. And just like I said, gospel does not do Hutty's business, that systematics cannot do the business of grammar, just so no theory can do the business of manuscripts. Where the money's to be made is starting to look at individual manuscripts. What are the readings? Are you sure we got the readings right? How similar are these to others? What is the character of the manuscript, and so forth? When you read manuscript B, Vaticanus, for example, it's got idiosyncratic spelling, and idiosyncratically, it uses the reflexive pronoun rather than the personal pronoun on a regular basis. So, for example, it's the only one that does. So it'll say, Jesus said to his own disciples, hell to, rather than out to. Well, it's just too idiosyncratic. It's just a kind of a tick, a characteristic of that copyist, and the rest of them don't have that. So I'm not going to go along with it.
Did Paul know the Gospels?
Did Paul know the Gospels? I would say Paul knew the Gospel writers. See, now whether or not the Gospels were written by the time he died, or from when he wrote, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking Paul knew the Gospel story and the writers.
Or we knew God before Gospels per se. That's what I was saying.
I just don't know. Yeah, I'm more text-tied than that. That's the thing. Yeah.
Not a ball question.
Well, listen, we probably have a couple of minutes, but we are at a very
10 seconds.
yeah. Well, we have a very good breaking point before we get to B there, and then we'll talk about all this about how the Greek changes and everything like that, which is really cool. So, so we'll pick it up from there tomorrow. I want to thank you all for your attention and for putting up with a lot of technical gobbledygook. I really appreciate this. But this is a group that's ready for it. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to do a couple of things. Barb, do you have an announcement? Okay. I'd like to do a couple of things. We're going to bring that garbage can